I always believed that no matter what happened in life, your parents would be there when you truly needed them. Growing up, my mother loved to say, family always comes first. I carried those words with me for years, trusting them like a promise that could never be broken. But promises are fragile things, and I learned that on the night my daughter was born. It was a cold Thursday evening, and the rain had been falling since late afternoon. The quiet tapping against the windows made my small apartment feel even lonelier than usual. My husband Jake was working overseas for another 3 months, and most days I tried to stay strong for our baby growing inside me. At 8 months pregnant, everything felt heavier. My body, my thoughts, and sometimes even my hope. That night I was folding tiny baby clothes when a sudden sharp pain shot through my stomach. I froze, gripping the edge of the table. "Okay," I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. "It's probably nothing." But then it happened again. Stronger, I slowly sat down, breathing the way the pregnancy classes had taught me. Maybe it was just false labor. Everyone said that could happen near the end of pregnancy. 5 minutes later, another contraction hit, and this one made me gasp. My hands began to shake as a quiet panic crept into my chest. I picked up my phone and called the one person I believed would come immediately, my mother. She answered after a few rings. "Hello." Her voice sounded distracted. "Mom," I said, trying to control my breathing. "I think the baby is coming." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Already?" she replied, sounding more annoyed than worried. "You're still early, Emma. Are you sure you're not just being dramatic?" Another contraction tightened around my stomach, and I winced. "I don't think so," I whispered. "The pain is really strong. I can't drive like this. Can you come take me to the hospital?" For a moment there was silence. Then I heard the television in the background. "Your father and I are in the middle of our show." I blinked in confusion. "I know, Mom, but I really need help." "The hospital is 20 minutes away and—" "Emma," she interrupted impatiently, "just call a cab." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. "A cab." I repeated softly. "Yes," she said casually. "People do it all the time. You're an adult now. You need to learn to handle things yourself." Tears stung my eyes as another contraction made me double over. "Mom, please. We'll come visit after the baby is born," she added. "Now I have to go." The call ended, just like that. I stared at the dark phone screen in disbelief. My chest felt hollow, like something inside me had cracked open. The people who raised me, people who always said family mattered most, had just chosen a television show over helping their daughter give birth. Another wave of pain forced me to move. Shaking, I opened a ride app and ordered a cab. The driver arrived 10 minutes later, a kind middle-aged man who immediately noticed the panic on my face. "You okay, miss?" he asked gently. "I'm in labor," I whispered. His eyes widened. "Well then," he said quickly, helping me into the back seat, "let's get you to that hospital." As the car pulled away into the rainy night, I watched the streetlights blur through the window. I had never felt so alone in my life, but what I didn't know yet was that the night my parents abandoned me would also become the night that quietly changed everything between us forever. The hospital lights felt painfully bright when the cab finally pulled up to the emergency entrance. Rain soaked the pavement, reflecting the glowing red letters above the doors. My contraction hit again just as the driver helped me out of the car, and I had to grip the side of the vehicle to stay upright. "Easy, easy," he said kindly. "You're almost there." I managed a weak nod as he rushed inside to call for help. Within seconds, 2 nurses hurried out with a wheelchair. "First baby?" One of them asked gently while helping me sit down. "Yes," I whispered, still trying to process the fact that I had arrived completely alone. They wheeled me through the automatic doors and into the maternity ward. The smell of antiseptic and the sound of distant hospital monitors filled the air. Everything felt overwhelming and unreal. "Is the baby's father on his way?" the nurse asked while checking my chart. "He's working overseas," I said quietly. "And your parents?" she asked. I hesitated. "They're busy." The nurse gave me a sympathetic look but didn't ask any more questions. Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. The contractions became stronger, closer together, and impossible to ignore. Every time I squeezed the hospital bed railing, I wished someone familiar was there to hold my hand. Each time footsteps passed outside the room, a small, hopeful part of me wondered if my parents had changed their minds. Maybe they realized how serious this was. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they were rushing through the doors right now. But the door never opened. It was always just another nurse. Breathe, Emma. One of them encouraged as another contraction gripped my body. You're doing great. I nodded weakly, but tears slid down the sides of my face, not just from the pain, from the silence. 14 hours after I arrived, the doctor finally looked at me and smiled. All right, she said calmly. It's time. The room suddenly filled with focused energy. Nurses moved quickly, adjusting equipment and guiding me through each push. Almost there, someone said, just one more. I screamed, gathering every last bit of strength I had left. And then a tiny cry filled the room. The sound was small but powerful, cutting through everything. My heart instantly melted. The doctor gently placed a warm, squirming bundle into my arms. Congratulations, she said softly. You have a beautiful baby girl. I stared down at the tiny face looking back at me. Her little fingers curled instinctively around mine, and something inside my chest shifted in a way I had never felt before. Hi, Lily, I whispered through tears. I'm your mom. For the first time all night, I didn't feel completely alone. She was here, and somehow that made everything worth it. A few minutes later, while I was still holding Lily against my chest, my phone buzzed on the small hospital table beside the bed. I reached for it slowly. It was a message from my mother. Did you have the baby yet? Send pictures. I stared at the words for a long moment. No, are you okay? No, do you need help? Just pictures. A hollow feeling settled in my stomach. Carefully, I turned my phone off and set it back down. Then I looked back at Lily, who had already fallen asleep in my arms. Her tiny breathing was soft and steady. You and me, I whispered gently, brushing a finger across her cheek. We'll take care of each other. In that quiet hospital room, I made a silent promise to myself. The people who left me alone on the hardest night of my life would never again have the power to hurt me the same way. But I didn't know yet that the real shock, the thing that would change everything between us, was still waiting just a few weeks away. 2 weeks after Lily was born, life had slowly started to settle into a new rhythm. Sleep was rare. Coffee had become my best friend. My tiny apartment was filled with baby blankets, bottles, and the soft sounds of Lily's breathing. It was exhausting, but it was also peaceful in a strange way. For the first time in years, my world felt simple. It was just me and her. My parents hadn't visited yet. My mother had asked for pictures a few more times, but I kept my responses short. Something inside me had quietly changed after that night in the hospital. I no longer felt the same need to please her. One quiet afternoon, while Lily slept in her crib beside the couch, there was a knock on my door. I frowned in confusion. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. Dad? My father stood in the hallway, shifting awkwardly on his feet like he wasn't sure he was welcome. Hi, Emma, he said quietly. For a moment neither of us spoke. I stepped aside and let him come in. The apartment was small but tidy. Baby bottles were drying on the counter, and Lily's tiny pink socks were folded neatly on the coffee table. His eyes moved around the room before landing on crib. That's her, he asked softly. I nodded. He walked over slowly and looked down at Lily sleeping peacefully. She's beautiful, he murmured. Something about the way he said it felt genuine, and for the first time since the night I went into labor, my anger softened slightly. Why are you here? I asked carefully. My father sighed and sat down at the kitchen table. Your mother doesn't know I came. He admitted. That didn't surprise me. She still thinks I overreacted about the cab. I said flatly. He rubbed his forehead, clearly uncomfortable. I heard about what happened, he said. I should have come that night. I'm sorry. The apology caught me off guard. For years, my father had always stayed quiet when my mother made decisions. Hearing him admit regret felt strange. But before I could respond, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the table toward me. What's this? I asked. Your grandfather's will. I blinked in confusion. My grandfather had passed away a few months earlier, but my mother had already claimed that most of his property would go to her. Why are you giving this to me? I asked slowly, because your mother misunderstood something. I carefully opened the envelope and began scanning the document. Then I saw it, the lake house, the property my mother had talked About for years, the one she always said would be hers someday, but the name listed beside the property wasn't hers. It wasn't even mine. It was Lily's. I looked up at my father in shock. This had to be a mistake. I said. He shook his head. No mistake. Your grandfather changed the will shortly before he passed. But why Lily? My father glanced toward the crib again, watching my daughter sleep. He told me once that the house should belong to the youngest member of the family. He explained quietly. He wanted it to be a place where future generations could grow up and make memories. My heart raced as I processed what that meant, so Mom doesn't know. No, he said. She assumed the house was hers. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. The same parents who couldn't drive me to the hospital, the same mother who told me to call a cab while I was in labor, would soon discover that the most valuable thing in the family now belonged to the baby they barely acknowledged. My father stood up slowly. Your mother will find out eventually, he said. I looked down at Lily again. Something told me that when that moment came, my mother would suddenly become very interested in being a grandmother. 3 weeks after Lily was born, motherhood had already taught me many things. Patience, strength, and how little sleep a human body could survive on. But the most important lesson was something deeper. I had learned that love wasn't proven through words. It was proven through actions, and my mother's actions had spoken very clearly the night she told me to call a cab while I was in labor. One quiet afternoon, Lily was asleep on my chest while I sat on the couch, enjoying one of the rare peaceful moments of the day. The apartment was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and my daughter's gentle breathing. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mom, for a moment I considered ignoring the call, but curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Hello. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Emma, honey. I was just thinking about you and my granddaughter. My granddaughter. The words felt strange coming from her. That's nice, I said carefully. I was wondering if maybe I could come visit. She continued. I haven't seen Lily yet, and I think it's time families started bonding. I stayed quiet for a moment, remembering the conversation I'd had with Dad about the will. Something about her sudden warmth didn't feel genuine. Why now? I asked calmly. There was a brief pause on the other end of the phone. Well, she said slowly, your father mentioned something about your grandfather's will. There it was, the real reason. He told me the lake house was left to Lily. She continued, which is wonderful, of course. But since she's just a baby, someone responsible will need to help manage the property. I couldn't help letting out a small, humorless laugh. So that's why you want to visit? What do you mean? She said quickly. You didn't come when I was in labor. I reminded her. You didn't visit the hospital. You haven't even asked how I've been recovering. That's not fair, she snapped. I was busy that night, and you know how dramatic you can be. Her words didn't hurt the way they used to. Instead, they made something inside me feel calm, clear. I looked down at Lily sleeping peacefully in my arms. Her tiny hand was curled around the edge of my shirt. You told me to call a cab, I said quietly. Silence filled the line. You left me alone on the hardest night of my life. My mother tried to recover her sweet tone. Well, that's in the past. We should focus on the future now. Lily deserves to spend time with her grandmother, especially at the lake house. The house Lily owns, I corrected. Another pause. Well, technically she's a baby, my mother said quickly, so someone has to make decisions for her. I thought maybe I could help with that. I took a slow breath. For the first time in my life, I felt completely certain about what I needed to say. No. The word was simple, but powerful. What do you mean, no? My mother asked sharply. I mean, I said calmly, you don't get to suddenly care about my daughter because she inherited something valuable. That's ridiculous, no? I replied, what's ridiculous is expecting me to forget the night you abandoned me. My mother started to argue, but I gently ended the call. The apartment fell silent again. I looked down at Lily and kissed the top of her tiny head. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was simply this. The daughter my parents once dismissed had built a life without them. And the granddaughter they suddenly wanted would grow up surrounded only by people who truly loved her. That was something they could never take away.